The opportunity to make a difference is something phenomenal. And people don't know how legislation works quite often, how politics works, how government works, how parliament works, why they're different. And that's some of the beauty of our position is being able to leverage everything to try and create a different solution and create a different future. And one of the best examples came through what's called the Custodial Sentences and Weapons Act, the Knife Crime Act to you and me. And this email popped into my inbox a good number of years ago, called Knife Crime. And before I deleted it, assuming it was spam, thankfully I did read it, because it was genuinely an issue from some of our members saying, actually, this is going to have an impact. So when you say to people you work in sports policy, people think, well, you can't be that busy because there aren't that many of them. But you say, actually, a huge part of that is working. So we work across about 13 different departments of government. We're a very small team, but that's the nature of the impact that sport can have. So whether it's business rates or water and sewerage rates, as we've talked about before, volunteering, honours, on and on and on. All those areas that we know can have an impact on sport, but also where we want them to help us to have a positive impact on sport. So the email had come in, we read it and work through and realise, right, okay, an unintended consequence of policy, something that happens a lot. Policy is incredibly difficult to draft, let's be clear. It's not my job, thankfully, from that part, but you read it and you think hats off to the people that do it without question. But they can't know everything. So sometimes there are areas that cause challenge that people wouldn't be aware until a draft comes out, which is why there's consultation and opportunity for conversation. So our members at the time of archery, field archery and fencing came to us collectively and said, this is a problem. So what you and I would know as the Knife Crime Act basically says that under 16s, you cannot carry a knife. You cannot be given a knife, sorry. You can't be given a knife. Seems reasonable and fair. However, under the definition of a knife within the draft policy as it was at the time, it meant that the epis, foils and sabres used by fencing and arrows that are used in all forms of archery are knives. These are some of our smaller members. The way their sport develops is usually, come and try events for kids, taster sessions. You can imagine all sports do this. They say, great, Alan, come along, right? I'm going to show you how to do this. There you go. Well, at that point, you're breaking the law. So for these sports to be engaging and having the huge impact that they have on young people now, but let alone thinking, well, actually, for people at all stages of life, then think, oh, I've seen that. I played that when I was younger. I'd like to go back to that. This was, literally taking the feet from under these sports to say, where's your development going to come from? Because there's an unintended consequence of a definition of a knife. So we have our members that come to us and say, we know this is the impact, but how do you change knife crime legislation? And us saying, okay, we'll have that conversation. So again, always being driven by our members. We listen to them, we understand what the problems are, what the challenges are, what the nuances. Because let's face it, we're not going to stop the Knife Crime Act for this reason, but we know what do we need to change. So again, solutions. What are the things that we can change that mean that the premise that underpins the Act isn't changed, because obviously that's incredibly important, but it will still allow those sports to be able to be active. We then have that conversation across all 5 parties in government. We then have that conversation, all 5 parties in Parliament. We then have that conversation with the government to say, here's the problem, here's why it's a problem, here's the impact that it'll have, and here's what we'd like you to do about it. And we have support. It was a huge piece of work one of my colleagues at the time, David, did leading that part, and it was phenomenal. But it was changing the floor of the chamber in Parliament by MSPs debating it and saying this is incredibly important to the future of sports in Scotland. So together we got that changed. And then just afterwards, actually there was a major international championship for archery in Princes Street Gardens. And Kenny McCaskill, who was the Cabinet Secretary for Justice at the time, came. Come and see what you've saved. Come and see the enjoyment that people have participated. So, we're the small part in that makes it happen. But it's that connection. But it's explaining the impact. And knowing the right people to engage to say, this is why we need you to make this change.